Howdy folks, it's your jack of all trades, master of none, Papa Nerd here for all your casual geek needs. First and foremost, I just want to either welcome you to the channel or welcome you back. And yeah, based off the title of the video, you might be asking yourself, what exactly are Heroclix? Well, Heroclix are these things. Heroclix is a tabletop miniature skirmish game typically played between two people with the goal of knocking out your opponent's team using Heroclix. Now, what exactly is a Heroclix? Well, a Heroclix usually is a small figure representing a hero or villain from popular Marvel or DC TV shows, movies, comic books, etc., involving both the figure and the dial it sits on. On the dial itself are a variety of numbers that dictate things like attack, defense, and on those numbers are colors indicating different powers that these figures have. With those figures, like I mentioned, you battle with an opponent attempting to knock out each other's team before they knock out yours. Now, there is an element of randomness and chance to the game involving dice. When you make an attack or use certain abilities, you roll for it. So it's not always a guaranteed outcome. Now, before we dive into the nitty-gritty details of the game and start covering rules and things like that, we're going to go into a little bit more depth into the hobby itself and talk a little bit about where it's been, where it's going, and how you can get involved with it. Heroclix first released back in 2002, which is when I first started playing. They're produced by a company called WizKids, and while the company structure has changed over the years, for the most part, they've been the driving force and soul behind the game since the beginning. Back then, miniature games weren't super common or as prolific. The most notable collectible miniatures game at the time was one called Mage Knight, also produced by WizKids. There were a few other miniature type games out at the time, most notably probably being like Warhammer or other war games like that. But yeah, collectible miniature games were a fairly new and fairly recent advent around that time. The first set of Heroclix was called Infinite Challenge. It focused on Marvel characters such as Spider-Man, Wolverine, the X-Men, and Captain America. And yeah, just Marvel comic book characters in general. From there, they expanded out. The next set was called Hyper Time, and that one covered DC comic book characters, most notably Superman, Batman, Joker, likes of them. Well, you didn't really need to know these comic book characters to get involved in the hobby or be able to play it. It definitely added an extra layer in depth to the game, being able to create teams of your favorites or, doing a mishmash or crossover of DC versus Marvel, things like that. So, while not necessary, certainly add an extra level of enjoyment for certain people. Later sets involved other properties, including things like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Lord of the Rings, Star Trek, and even like Dark Horse Comics, which had characters like Hellboy and Judge Dredd. And yeah, they've been putting out about 3 to 4 sets a year since the beginning, and they've contained a pretty steady and consistent pace since then. Now, the game itself isn't hard to learn. I would say, as somebody who's still fresh and getting back into it, that picking up the basics of the rules is pretty straightforward and pretty easy to do. It just has a lot of depth and nuance to it. So while the core concepts are something that you're going to pick up pretty quickly, you might be able to discover, unique or interesting interactions for your characters or your teams. The more you play and the more you get used to your figures. As far as the rules itself goes, we're going to spend a lot more time breaking down those rules as well as the powers and abilities in my next few videos. So be sure to check that out. But for now, let's talk a little bit about the player base and community that you can expect to find amongst Heroclix. Now, I don't believe Heroclix has ever been a massively popular game, especially compared to the likes of something like Magic the Gathering or Pokemon, but it seems to have always had a small, tight-knit, very dedicated community propping it up and keeping it alive all these years. Now, I would wager most cities and places have at least one friendly local game store that runs either regular game nights or regular events for it. But as well, there's a multitude of other ways to get involved in the hobby too, whether it be through online means, such as programs like Roll20 or Tabletop Simulator. Or the other nice thing about Heroclix is it being a 2-player game, you really only need one other person to play it with. And so it's a great way to connect or bond with someone, maybe get a friend or family member involved with it with you at the same time. So that way you have someone to play with. Now, getting into the hobby can be a little bit of a challenge. We'll go into a lot more detail with that in one of our future videos as well too. But one product I can't recommend enough is their starter sets. Now, I've got an extra one here, Avengers vs. Master of Evil, that we're going to use over the course of the next few videos to really break down the rules, powers and abilities, things like that. And then at the end of our video series, we're going to be giving this starter set away to somebody else, so hopefully they can start their own collection. But these starter sets are fantastic. They come with a variety of figures. They have your maps that you need, your tokens, dice, all that sort of thing, as well as your rule books and powers ability cards. So comes with all the basics that you're going to need to get started straight out the gate. Now, the figures they give you aren't going to be ones that are going to be super competitive or ones you're bringing to a tournament or anything like that, but they're simple and basic enough to help teach you the game, but still have, some nuance and challenge to them, so that way you can try some different things out with them. Now, speaking of figures, I would imagine that's the draw for a lot of people when it comes to this hobby. I know it was for me back then and even now. And so, definitely something worth considering getting into the hobby when it comes to collectible miniatures game. I don't know what it is about miniatures, but there's just something special and unique about being able to hold something in your hand, move it around the table, interact with it. Just an itch that collectible card games never seem to be able to scratch for me. So with that being said, here's a few examples of some more modern figures. So as I showed earlier, here's Captain America. We also have a more modern example of Hulk here. And with these newer figures, they also include these cards as well too. So on one side, it shows their stat line, so it shows all their stats and whatnot. And then on the back, it shows their actual powers and abilities, as well as a breakdown of like their special abilities and traits and things like that. And yeah, compared to some of the earlier figures, the newer ones definitely are much higher quality these days, I would say, compared to some of the older ones. Here's some of some original ones. So these are from some of the early sets back when I first started playing. So here's a Spider-Man. Well, definitely not bad. Certainly leaves a little bit to be desired. Yeah, you can see there that that's a face only a mother could love. And there's Wolverine. So while from a few feet away, they probably don't look the worst. Up close, they're a little bit rougher, and I'd say a lot of the more modern Heroclix definitely have the edge when it comes to the old ones. Now, I wouldn't be Papa Nerd if I didn't address the game's accessibility for kids and young people. Now, as I mentioned a bit earlier, the game is pretty easy to learn, just a bit harder to master. So while certain figures have a little bit more complex or difficult to understand abilities, a majority of your commons, uncommons, figures that come in the starter set all are very easy to play with and get the hang of early on. So while they might need a little bit of help, reading the cards or reading the abilities or getting used to the game, I would imagine kids even as young as 6 or 7 years old could pick up Heroclix with fairly little trouble. And yeah, too, the fantasy of playing a team of superheroes going to beat up bad guys is a pretty easy sell for a lot of kids, and so a great way to start a loved one into a hobby with you as well too. Well, that about wraps it up here for us, folks. Like I mentioned, I think this is a great game and a fun hobby to get into, whether it be solo, with a friend, family member, or maybe even one of your kiddos. And while the game may seem a little bit daunting at first, given a little time and practice, you're going to be sitting down for games on a regular basis in no time. Over the next few videos, we're going to go into the rules a lot more in depth, as well as the powers and abilities. And a little further down the road from there, we're going to start discussing how to start a collection in the most cost-effective way and what's the best use of your hobby dollars when it comes to the game. I do want to give a quick shout out to a couple of other Heroclix content creators who've made excellent videos and helped inspire me getting back into the hobby. So that includes Dial H for Heroclix, Heroclix Headquarters, and the Tabletop Teacher. I'll include links to their channels down in the description below. But yeah, be sure to check out our next few videos. Like I mentioned, we'll be using the Avengers vs. Master of Evil starter set to kind of break down some of those rules and whatnot. And then at the end of that series, we'll be doing a giveaway for that starter set as well too. So be sure to check that out. If you enjoyed the video today, please be sure to leave a like. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, we'll see you next time, and happy gaming.